Hey y'all, Leela here with mskisskreations. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to be back. I have not done a voiceover for my videos in such a long time, and I'm so excited for this new tumbler that I want to share with y'all. This is a reverse ombre candy cane tumbler. Like always, all of my materials, some direct links, coupon codes will be linked in my description below, including some help videos for my beginners, and I also have my Amazon storefront in the description below. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. For this tumbler, I am using a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler from Makerflow Crafts. I am using a 120 grit sanding block to sand my tumbler. I typically use anywhere between a 60 grit sanding block and a 180 grit sanding block to sand my tumblers when I am doing the prepping. Make sure you are sanding the top of the tumbler and the bottom of the tumbler. Once I'm finished sanding, I use 91% alcohol with a clean new paper towel and I wipe around the tumbler. Make sure you are using at least 91% alcohol. This allows you to remove any of the excess oils or dust that may have been added to the tumbler. You want to make sure it is not 70 or 71% alcohol, because if you do use that, it might not be enough to remove those oils. So when you place the epoxy on the tumbler, you will risk having your epoxy repel on your tumbler. I am planning on spray painting this tumbler, so I place my tumbler arm inside of my tumbler and I'm using some painter's tape to tape the inside, so that way when I spray paint my tumbler, the overspray does not go inside the tumbler, just making my cleanup process at the end easier. Since this is a candy cane, I decided to use white and red. I am using a white that is a Lowe's brand, and I'm using Krylon Gloss Cherry Red. It does not matter the finish of the spray paint that you are using. The white is a matte and my red is a gloss. I just chose whatever I had on hand. Every time I spray paint outside. I do live in an apartment, so this is how I have my little spray paint area set up. I have a tote and I just place my tumbler inside its tote, and that way the overspray kind of goes inside of the tote and not all over my furniture or the apartment walls. I always start at the bottom when spray painting my tumbler. It's something I've always done. And when I first spray the tumbler, I aim my can, the nozzle, at the very bottom of the tumbler. That way, that excess spray paint from the can creeps up the tumbler and it kind of gives it a very slow ombre look, if that makes sense. And if you notice, once I get back in frame and I start spray painting, when I spray paint, I don't spray paint in a continuous motion. I spray some, move my tumbler, and then spray again. So I'm starting with my white here. I'm starting at the very top of it and I'm slowly moving up. So if you see, I'm spray painting, turning the tumbler, and then spray painting. This allows you to not only, in my opinion, get a better spray, an even spray, but this won't have your spray can or your spray paint drip on the tumbler. You slowly just spray, turn, spray, turn. And the great thing about spray painting is that if you do mess up, let your tumbler dry for about 10 to 15 minutes and come back in and spray paint over where you might have messed up. So it's a lot easier if you mess up, per se, painting your tumbler with acrylic paint. Mastering spray painting, or even being good at spray painting, takes a lot of time. I was not this good at spray painting in the beginning. I have been doing this for 6 years now, so it is a lot easier for me because I do have it down some. So again, make sure you're not doing the continuous sprays. You can see I'm spraying, stopping, turning my tumbler, and then spraying again. This is actually an awkward angle for me. I'm only doing this just to show y'all how I do it. If you see, I'm going to tip my tub right side up and then spray inside of my tub. That's how I typically spray paint when I'm not recording. And I do want to mention, when I do the ombres, I always end on the lighter color because I'd rather the lighter color show up on the darker color than the darker color show up on the lighter color. So I'd rather there be overspray of the white onto the red than the red onto the white, because when there's overspray If there's white overspray on the red, then it looks more ombre than if there's red overspray on the white. So I hope that makes sense. But this is how I typically spray paint. I wanted to leave this in the video to show y'all. This is usually my typical angle, just placing the tumbler inside of the tote, just as you would if you were just spray painting outside. And when I was finally finished, here is how my tumbler looks. It's not perfect, but you can see that white is sprayed more on the red than the red on the white. I don't know if you guys can see that, but maybe I just know that I end with the white, so it just makes sense in my head. But let this dry for about 20 to 25 minutes before we move on to the next step. Now that my tumbler spray paint is completely dry, I take that painter's tape inside out of the inside of the tumbler. Make sure it's dry when you're removing this paint, just so you're not scratching the paint or anything. And then now I'm applying a coat of epoxy onto this tumbler. I wanted some shimmer, so I am using eye candy from Glitter Heart Co. I do have a 10% off code, mskisskreations, for everything on Glitter Heart Co. And I am also using my Fast Set epoxy from Flynn Sister Supply Shop. And I also have a 10% off code, mskisskreations, to receive 10% off of anything on her website. I actually filmed this tumbler in like 2 days because of this Fast Set epoxy. So if you do have no patience like I do, make sure to try the Fast Set epoxy at Flynn Sister Supply Shop. This was like dried to the touch after like 3 hours because, again, I have no patience and very little time to craft lately. I am using about 20 mLs of epoxy for this tumbler. That's 10 mLs part A and 10 mLs part B, totaling 20 mLs of epoxy. I wanted to have a shimmer on this tumbler for the bottom coat, so that's why I added that eye candy glitter from Glitter Heart Co. And I thought it looked really pretty on the very bottom coat of this tumbler. If you don't like glitter, then you don't have to add the glitter. Just add your regular coat of epoxy with no glitter. You can always add a different type of glitter, chunky glitter, and you can even add some mica powder inside of this coat of epoxy as well. So like I said, this took about 2 to 3 hours for this epoxy to be dried before we move on to the next step. And now that my epoxy is cured on my tumbler, I am going to add the candy cane stripes on the tumbler with some blue painter's tape. My painter's tape is 1 inch wide, but you can use any size painter's tape you have on hand. I start by laying my very first piece down, and you want to lay it down in a spiral motion, not a diagonal motion, but spiral. You see how I have to turn my cup to lay my painter's tape down? Make sure you have that spiral, because there's a difference between diagonal and spiral. I know that sounds weird, but there is. So I place down 3 pieces of tape, and then I remove the middle piece, and that's going to be my template. So you lay down your first piece, your second, and your third, and then you tear up the middle piece, and then I'm using that piece again because that's going to act as my next template. So all you do is you continue to place your 3 tapes down and you pull up the middle piece. So here I am placing my 3rd piece for my 2nd row, I should say. Make sure you're turning your tumbler as you're placing the tape down, and then you remove that middle piece. So to get that nice spiral candy cane look, you have to make sure that you're moving your tumbler as you're laying your tape down, instead of that just a, I guess, diagonal line on the tumbler. I don't know if like I'm just OCD when it comes to the spiral look and the diagonal look, but I like a nice spiral turn because that's what a candy cane has. And you can always make it more spirally, right? So all I do is I look at all of the areas, make sure that they're nice and spiraled, and I just adjust the tape as needed. So I know a lot of people, they do the fancy smanchy bottom when it comes to like the whole spiral on the bottom. I don't. I'm going to keep it very beginner-like and beginner-friendly, and because I just don't have that much patience to mess with the bottom, all I do is I just cut the bottom pieces of tape and I leave the bottom one solid color. So you'll see I'm peeling it all up, and I take my X-Acto knife and my scissors and I just cut that tape and make sure it's even, so the color, the bottom is just one solid color. My tumblers are made for y'all to have inspiration. You can either copy this tumbler exactly how you see it, or you can use this as inspiration. So make your tumbler whichever way you like, whichever way makes your little heart happy. I know whatever you create is going to be beautiful. And you will be spraying on top of this tumbler with the tape down. So make sure you are applying that tape nice and snug to the tumbler. You don't want any bubbles or anything on the tape. So when you apply your spray paint, none of the excess spray paint goes underneath the tape. All right, now that I have all of my pieces on the tumbler, I'm going to take my tumbler outside and I'm going to apply my spray paint in the opposite direction. So where the red is, I'm applying my white, and where the white is, I'm applying my red. The same thing, I'm spraying the spray paint, moving my tumbler, spraying the spray paint again, just to avoid drips. I was more careful this time because this is the top coat and I'm not applying any glitter, so I don't want any drips on the tumbler. And I do want to point out that I am using the same red, but keep in mind that this background is white that I'm spraying over. In the first round, the background was a stainless steel color, so it does change the color of the red. But I think it turned out really cool how it looks like there's two different reds on the tumbler. So avoid looking like you have two different reds, just start with a white background. So once you prep your tumbler, spray your tumbler completely white, let that dry, and then spray your first ombre color over the white base instead of starting with a stainless steel base. And now it's time to peel up the tape from the tumbler. I do not wait until the spray paint is dry. I always peel up my painter's tape when my paint is wet, just so I can make sure I have those crisp lines. When it's dry, sometimes the dry paint will attach to the painter's tape and then you won't have those nice lines on your tumbler. Just remember, this video is sped up, so I am doing this very slowly. So take your time when peeling up the painter's tape. Once your tape is removed from your tumbler, make sure you let your tumbler spray paint dry for about 20 to 25 minutes before going in with this next epoxy coat. I'm using my Fast Set epoxy from Flint's Sister Supply Shop, and I'm using about 10 mLs of epoxy. So that's about 5 mLs part A and 5 mLs part B. I want a very thin coat of epoxy on this tumbler just to seal this tumbler's design in, because this is not the final coat of epoxy. I didn't add any glitter or mica powder to this epoxy. I let this tumbler turn, let the epoxy cure for a couple hours, and then I was ready for the next step. So now I'm going to add my decals to the tumbler, and typically before I add my decals to any tumbler, I would sand around the tumbler, but I did not have to sand this tumbler at all between epoxy coats. There was no epoxy bubbles at all on this tumbler. This Flint's Sister Supply Shop epoxy is literally the best epoxy I have used to date. So I'm going right into adding my decals to the tumbler, and I am keeping this very simple because I really am proud of the design and I want the design to show. So I'm not adding anything else besides some vinyl stripes just to separate the red and white colors. So I had this glitter vinyl on hand. I don't know exactly where it came from, but it will be linked in the description below by the time I'm finished editing this video and finding where I purchased this from. I created some squares on Cricut Design Space, and the size will be on the screen when I edit this video's text, just so you know the dimensions of the lines that I added to this tumbler. I prefer very dainty and tiny thin lines over thicker lines, so I want to say off the top of my head, this is probably 0.60, 0.06. Honestly, I can't even tell y'all. Just look at the screen. It's going to be on there. And then I always make my lines like 12 inches long, and then I'll cut them down just in case. I'd rather have a longer piece of vinyl than a shorter piece of vinyl. So, but it's just the width that you guys need to worry about, and the size. I think it's 0.06. But I will confirm that. And I just lay them down very carefully, and I just follow the lines that are placed on the tumbler. And you can see the difference. I see a swirl on the tumbler and not just like a line. Does that make sense? The tumbler is swirling like a candy cane. Again, these tumblers are made for inspiration for y'all. So if you do want to add one of those cute candy cane company decals on your tumbler, I will have one linked in my description below for y'all. I know those are super popular. I'll have them linked from Creative Fabrica. I use that website for everything, for all of my decals. It's really easy to search, so I will add probably 2 or 3 below just so you guys can choose from those 3 designs. I've never been a big fan of adding a lot of decals to tumblers because I feel it takes away from my art. That's just probably an unpopular opinion, but do whatever makes your little heart happy. So once I apply all the lines to the tumbler, I take my X-Acto knife and scissors and I just cut the lines or the vinyl in the areas. Now it's very important, the top area that you cut, make sure you're using your X-Acto knife to cut a little bit below of your lip, because if you have that vinyl peeking above your rim of your tumbler, you're not going to have a good seal on your tumbler. So make sure that vinyl is below your rim. That way we have that seal on our tumbler when we apply the final coat of epoxy. And I always add my logo to the bottom of the tumbler. When I'm finished adding all of my decals to the tumbler on my vinyl, I always go over with my quick coat from DIY. This is a urethane sealer. This allows all of my vinyl and decals to be placed on the tumbler nice and snug, so I don't have to worry about my vinyl pieces lifting when I apply my epoxy. If you don't have this or cannot afford this or want to save some money, you can always use some polyacrylic that you can purchase from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, or even Amazon. I will have the polyacrylic in the DIY quick coat linked in my description below. Let this sealer dry for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we're going to add another coat of epoxy. Again, I am using my Fast Set epoxy. I am using 10 mLs of epoxy. That's 5 mLs part A and 5 mLs part B, totaling 10 mLs of epoxy. This takes about, like I said, 3 hours to dry, and then we're going to apply our final coat of epoxy. And for my final coat of epoxy, I am using the regular set epoxy. I am not using Fast Set. I never use Fast Set as my final coat. I personally do not like the smell of Fast Set after you wash the tumbler, so I always use the regular set epoxy from Flinsis or Supply Shop. Again, using very little amount of epoxy, about 10 mLs of epoxy total. That's 5 mLs part A and 5 mLs part B, totaling 10 mLs of epoxy. You do see I have a lot of epoxy in my cup, but I always epoxy in batches, so I made a big batch of epoxy for my other tumblers. Once that final coat of epoxy is cured, I'm going in with my X-Acto knife and I'm cleaning up the rim of the tumbler. I don't know if you guys remember, but my second spray paint round, I forgot to add painter's tape inside of my tumbler. So the overspray actually went inside of my tumbler. I was going to leave this part out, but I wanted to explain, if this were to happen to you, what you do to clean up the inside of your tumbler. I use 100% pure acetone and a couple of clean paper towels, and I clean up the inside of the tumbler, and that removes any spray paint that's been placed inside. Once you're finished cleaning up the inside of your tumbler with acetone, make sure you are cleaning your tumbler's inside with some dish soap. I use Dawn dish soap to clean the inside of my tumbler. I make sure I clean it very well, especially if I am using my acetone to clean up the inside. And when you're finished cleaning up your tumbler, take your tumbler's lid, place it on your tumbler, and your tumbler is completely finished. This is such a cute tumbler, and there's so many things you can do with this design. So many colors, shimmers, glitters. I cannot wait to see what you guys create. Don't forget to find me on all of my socials, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And if you did like this video, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more Tumbler and crafts videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.